Hi, everyone. I am Andrea. I'm here with SWOP-USA with Alex from SWOP Behind Bars and Catherine Coster. Hope I got her name right. And Catherine, our communications director, who also works closely with SWOP Behind Bars. In today's webinar, we're going to talk about the impact of criminalization on the U.S., the experience and needs of incarcerated individuals with sex trade experience, SWOP Behind Bars efforts to reach out and engage in organizing work with this community, and what you can do to get involved or start outreach to incarcerated sex workers in your area. First, talking about the impact of criminalization in the U.S. Criminalization impacts sex workers in many different ways, a lot of ways that include violations of human rights. It leads to lifelong discrimination and stigmatization. For undocumented and documented migrants, this means that they can get deported. It leads to higher risk for exploitation and abuse, to no recourse for sex workers who experience violence, discrimination, and or abuse in the workplace, or even in the home environment. It leads to possible court-mandated religious-based social services, possible eviction and denial of future lease applications, possible jail and or prison time, and a criminal record that will promote discrimination from employment, student loans, public services, and housing. And the list continues. Human rights are routinely violated at local, state, and federal levels. Arbitrary arrest and detention happen all of the time, with a total of 839,300 prostitution-related arrests between 2001 and 2011. Sex workers can often become the victims of violent crimes because they can't report to the police due to fears of self-incrimination. Sex workers can be discriminated against in courts by landlords, by companies, and by healthcare providers, even without being arrested beforehand. And sex workers often lose custody of their children after only being arrested, not yet convicted, only arrested. They can lose their kids both by state child services and family court in divorce disputes. Condoms are often used as evidence, preventing some sex workers from carrying them on themselves and protecting themselves from sexually transmitted infections and pregnancy. And trafficking victims often end up in criminal justice systems when arrested, and law enforcement officers don't listen or don't care that they are victims of trafficking. Oftentimes they can even be put in jail to protect themselves, which is pretty disheartening. About incarcerated sex workers, this is where I'm actually going to point to Alex to pick up and start talking about that.
Okay, yes. Thank you. I'm Alex. I am with SWOP Behind Bars and SWOP Orlando. About criminalization and sex workers, there's a high percentage of women in prison who have experience in the commercial sex trade, even though they may not know, they may not identify it as that. Most incarcerated street-based sex workers don't self-identify as sex workers during the jail or the prison classification process, and therefore they don't receive many of the services that they might be eligible for otherwise. Most incarcerated sex workers have been homeless or at risk of being homeless before incarceration, and they pretty much fully expect to be homeless or at risk of being homeless after incarceration. Many sex workers and sex trafficking victims have to register as sex offenders in addition to having to register as felons once they're released from prison. Here at SWOP Behind Bars, most of the time we are dealing with folks who are in prison. The difference between jail and prison is when you are arrested, you immediately go to jail. You will have an initial court date, which is usually within 24 hours. It's called an arraignment, and you'll have a bond set. A bail bond is a guarantee that the person is going to appear in court at future date or future dates. The bond amounts can vary, and they are usually up to the officer when they're initially placed in jail, or that's according to the charge, and they're usually preset according to the charges. If one is not able to bond out of jail, they'll have to remain in jail until their case is complete, which can take months or even years. In the meantime, while someone is being held in jail awaiting their court case to be heard by a judge, they often lose pretty much everything. Because they have been incarcerated, they obviously can't pay their rent. They lose their home, whatever is in their home, any kind of situation with children going on, etc. A person often takes a plea deal in order to avoid that entire staying in jail process. And in the case of sex work related arrests and these plea deals, criminal charges can often stack up and eventually lead to a prison sentence, and contribute to a longer than expected sentence. What I really want to add in that is very often sex workers are arrested and they might get a misdemeanor prostitution charge, and then they might get another one of those, and then they have another charge from maybe a drug offense or a related offense, and those charges stack up, and eventually they will point out and they will get a prison sentence that would be longer than if it was just nothing more than a prostitution related offense. Once they go to prison, that is because they've been sentenced and their case is considered complete, and there is almost no recourse for a sentenced person to get their case reheard by a judge. State and federal prisons are usually located in remote locations within the state and throughout the country. It makes visiting very difficult. Family members have a hard time traveling to the locations, and it further isolates the individual from the community. There are some prison programs that address literacy, job training, and substance abuse, but there's not nearly enough inside of prison, and not everyone who goes to prison actually gets these services. Once their sentence is complete, they get what's called an EOS date, which means end of sentence. They are released with the clothing that they arrived at the prison in, if their family hasn't sent anything else, a bus ticket to wherever they say home is, and sometimes a few dollars, usually under $50. A lot of people want to know why it's important that we support incarcerated sex workers. Does anyone have any questions at this point so far, once we got past the jail and prison thing? Would anyone like to?
Yeah, so I would like to add something. In terms of, I know a number of people have submitted pre-questions about how these laws vary from state to state and place to place. They vary immensely. In a few states, including Florida and South Carolina, Louisiana, West Virginia, prostitution can still be upgraded to a felony on a second, third, or fourth arrest, right? And whether a state decides to prosecute and sentence sex work as a felony also varies a lot from state to state. So places like South Carolina and Florida are some of the only states where people who are being arrested specifically for prostitution are actually getting state prison time. Like, we have members of SWOP Behind Bars who were arrested for, a third or fourth or fifth prostitution arrest in the state of Florida, who are now serving, 8 to 12-month jail sentences. Whereas in other states, they might have that upgrade option, but they will not use that. And most people might just get time considered served, or they might get like a month in a state jail or in a county jail. Another really important thing is, even within a given state, the way in which judges sentence vary tremendously. So this is probably something that you're going to see a lot, especially in states that have large rural and urban populations. So Greensboro, which has the North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition, or Atlanta, which has a really, really active coalition to support criminal justice reform, is going to sentence sex work and drug possession in a completely different way. And sort of an additional thing relating to decriminalization, a number of people have asked who our SWOP Behind Bars members are. A large number of people wound up in jail for small-scale drug possession, for petty theft. Some people wound up in jail for prostitution specifically. Some people got charged with trafficking for posting other people's ads, especially if those people happen to be minors. I think that one of the misconceptions is that the war on drugs and the war on sex work are two completely distinct and different things. And based on the people who are members of SWOP Behind Bars, that's absolutely, absolutely inaccurate. Lots of people engage in sex work to to be able to sustain themselves while they're using substances. A lot of people are engaging in sex work and also hustling, and also, you know, engaging in petty theft. So these are all very, very related charges. I'm done.
Okay. Incarcerated sex workers are at a high risk for stigmatization and discrimination when they are in jail or behind the prison walls. This is due to the fact that very often they are in there for a drug charge as well. They may be in there for a domestic dispute, because they are very and discrimination. They have very few resources from which to draw during their incarceration or after they're released. So they very often don't have stamps in order to write letters. They don't have money to buy commissary. They have very, very little. So their poverty that they were experiencing on the outside of prison continues while they are inside of prison. They have a great deal of difficulty communicating their needs inside and outside of the prison. We get a lot of letters from sex workers, and it'll say, I'd like information about substance abuse and recovery, but they won't tell us what kind of they can recover with. Or they want information about a job or information about how to open a business, but they didn't have the money to send us a letter. They had to send their letter in with someone else's. So they may not have their GED. There's a lot of, they have a very difficult time communicating what it is they need.
But they didn't have the money to send us a letter. They had to.
They would just send it. They'll send us a letter, and very often it'll ask us for something when there's some other stuff that they need, but they won't send that until another letter later on down the road. So they have difficulty communicating their needs. They have a difficult time expressing to us what it is they need. They rarely self-identify as sex workers until after we have communicated to them about who we are and what we do. Most of them had never heard of sex work. They'd never heard of sex worker rights. They'd never heard of pretty much anything having to do with the word sex work until we started sending newsletters. It's our goal to create a point of contact during incarceration, and then to alleviate the difficulties of re-entering society after incarceration, preventing reincarceration. We want to provide harm reduction services within the local communities that they are released to, so that the people that are in the communities are able to assist them as well. Our primary goal is to provide information and education about the sex worker rights movement in the United States, and to ask them to be a part of our community. We do this by publishing a monthly newsletter between 8 and 10 pages. We mail it inside. It has an intake form that is inside of it. We have a variety of information from a very wide community, wide part of our community, and it talks all about, not just about sex work, but it also talks about life skill building. We have in this last newsletter that went out, we talked about boundaries and how to set and respect other people's boundaries. We try to have a little bit of kind of skills information built into it as well. We have an intake form that the people can fill out. They can sign up to be on the newsletter list. They can sign up to get a pen pal. They can sign up and tell us how many books they want, or the kind of material that they're interested in, when they're going to be released, all of that kind of information. We write letters, we send books, we respond to requests for information. We realize that there's a lack of reentry resources, and we're trying to fill the gaps. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel and provide all this. We're just trying to fill in the gaps that are not available. One of our biggest and most successful programs we've been able to provide GED guides. There was a very limited amount of people that were able to go to the GED classes inside the prison at Lowell, in the women's prison, and so we started sending GED guides inside, and they were able to really increase the capacity for GED training. We respond to requests for services. We know what we can provide and what we can't provide, and we also know what we want to provide for when they are released. We want to create the kind of community that we would want to join. We are very serious about helping them negotiate their own program for success, and we don't try to tell them how they're going to do it. And this is vastly different from the experience that they've had with a lot of anti-trafficking organizations. A lot of people want to know what the big deal is with getting mail. When mail is received by incarcerated sex workers, it really can help prevent violence against them. And the reason for this is at mail call, it's usually around 3 o'clock in the afternoon in prison, and they have mail call, and you get called up to the front and you are able to get, or whatever. Most of the sex workers in there are not getting mail, so it's a big deal when you get mail. By getting mail, they it makes it appear as if they've got people on the outside. So the more mail they get, the higher their rank sort of is in prison. Mail can contain valuable information about reentry goals, and that's stuff that you can send them and that they can send us. Mail can contain national, regional, and local resources. When we have someone that wants to know about reentry resources or housing or groups in, say, Tampa, we'll send them a sheet that says all of the different closets that they can go get clothing at in the Tampa area. Mail can also create community guide and transition to community upon to the local sex worker networks that we have for continuing peer support. Mail exchange can also assist with helping us arrange outside support services for when they're released. And this is becoming an even larger part of our program. Here are some of the things that you need to know if you're trying to help support sex workers during release. Knowing what their current release date is and asking the following questions. Knowing the current release date is very important because even though there might be a date posted on the website of the Department of Corrections website, that date can change due to gain time. You know, they may have an action in the court that reduced their sentence time. They'll get out because they went to work release. They might get out 6 months early because they were able to get a bed in a transitional house or get into a substance recovery facility. If they don't have any of that, be sure to ask them where they're going, if they know where they're going, if they know how they're getting there. Most of the time, the prison will give the person that is being released, they'll give them a $50 Visa gift card and a bus ticket to wherever it is that they say that they live. So if they're going to Orlando, they'll get on a Greyhound in Ocala, and they will come to the bus stop in Orlando, and we need to know how we're going to how they're going to get to where they're going to stay from there. If they have a support network of family and friends, it's not unusual at all for people who are in prison to become disconnected from their family or friends. They probably do not have documents, although we've had a real turnaround in the last 6 months in Florida with the prison access getting a social security card. They're also able to access getting a state ID. We've been able to get it down to about 7 days if they don't even have a birth certificate. So we've been able to get identification documents for people for a little bit less than $85 within a 7-day period, which is pretty remarkable. We want to know if they have a plan for getting registered for public assistance. Are they able to apply for public benefits? In the state of Florida, as soon as a person is released from jail, they are eligible to apply for public benefits. They will get an immediate grant of a certain amount of food stamps. They won't get any cash assistance, but they are eligible for some very small public assistance benefits that helps them with getting food for the most part. And they may probably try to reestablish contact with their family. We ask them if they have hygiene supplies, if they have clothing, and if they had a plan for getting food. And then we continue to ask them what else do they need. We have provided a few cell phones. We have provided we've provided some odd things, but at the same time, the thing that most of them want is the community, the phone calls, the personal attention, and that has really probably meant the most to the folks that we've had released so far. Any questions so far? Nope. Okay.
Oh, and then one quick thing.
Okay.
I just wanted to introduce to the people who joined. So Bella Robinson is a really badass organizer.
Hi, Bella.
And a like regular SWOP Behind Bars columnist, and she's been really, really great at helping SWOP Behind Bars figure out what to do. She's having some issues with her microphone right now, but hopefully she can join and add comments later. We also have MG Dante.
Okay.
Hey, yeah, who's waving at us right now. I can just get her screen right now. Hi. And she's a really badass organizer in Philadelphia, as well as with the Erotic Service Providers Union. So I know a number of, yeah, and as pre-questions, a number of people asked about concrete steps and ideas and strategies towards decriminalization. So hopefully, like, you guys, MG and Bella, who's I think going to rejoin us in a sec, if you guys can sort of be the people to speak about that in addition to adding any comments or additions to what Alex is saying.
I see a question on here. Chris is asking, are those county jails offer the GED program? No. Most of them offer a GED program, but again, like with all publicly available services, you have to jump through all kinds of hoops in order to get your GED. I volunteered at the county jail for, and it's a smaller county jail here in Orlando, for about 2 years. And during that period of time that I was there, they had an average of 80 women who were being held at that particular jail. I know of 3 people who actually got their GED. They did offer the GED training or the GED tutoring, but the GED teacher was probably more of a problem than a help, and she kind of had a little issue with bringing in contraband, so she was not there. The GED people are generally volunteers. They are not paid employees. So it all depends on what the availability is and what the volunteer situation is. It's a really awesome opportunity to volunteer at a county jail if that's something anyone's interested in.
And then in terms of Florida in particular, so what someone who is a warden at a jail in Florida said is that there's not enough funding to fund GED and adult education programs for everyone there, which means that certain people don't qualify. So if you are in a faith-based or drug and alcohol rehabilitation program, you can't take GED classes. If you have a life sentence or a long sentence, you can't take GED classes. If you have too short of a sentence, you can't take GED classes. And then in terms of local county prisons, because a lot of people have such short stays, that isn't always available.
Not only that, but a lot of times if they are arrested and they've been involved with a group of people and they're not being allowed to share incarceration experience, shall we say, with those other people, they won't be allowed to take the GED classes or participate in any other kind of programming because they've been involved in the criminal community. So there's a lot of things that come into play with offering GED classes. It's not just, yes, they have GED programs, they advertise it all over their website. Does anybody actually get to them? No, very, very, very rarely do they have that opportunity.
Here in the city, when they get out of jail, they can come to work until they do whatever.
I'm sorry? Okay. We can go into the next slide. Identification documents. There is a vital records office in every county in the United States, and that is where they store all the birth certificates. It costs an average of $10, and it can take about 6 months in order to get that from the county. You can go to verisign.com with the person in your presence, ask the security questions, and you are able to get a birth certificate mailed to you within about 3 or 4 days. Once you receive the birth certificate, you can have the Social Security card application filled out. You can take that with a birth certificate, their prison ID, and you're able to get the Social Security card. We also have a master, let's call it a pay stub, that has a Social Security number on it that will allow them to get their motor vehicle state ID. It won't get them their driver's license, but it will get them their state ID. Those 3 documents are the thing that they're going to need in order to get pretty much any services. At least in the state of Florida, they have to have identification in order to register for going to a food bank to get free services from just about everything. They have to have identification. So the identification documents are absolutely critical in accessing other services. Next slide. Accessing public benefits within our own communities. And I've been having conversations with folks from around the country, and we've been talking about resources. Resources are very locally based. A food pantry that is here in the Orlando area does absolutely no good for someone who's in Philadelphia. So we all have to know what our well, you know, I'll send you a can of corn, but you know, that's really not going to help you over the long term. Knowing what resources that you have in your local area are critical. Being able to connect, knowing what resources they have available to connect to the internet and to make phone calls, knowing what the state's requirement for applying for and receiving those benefits, knowing the locations of the social service office, the food banks, and the free or low-cost closets such as Goodwill or Salvation Army. Goodwill, heavy sigh. Goodwill has been really great in some areas and absolutely despicable in others. So get to know your Goodwill. Some of them, Goodwill wants to be the largest jobs hunter for folks who have been incarcerated. And in some areas, they're doing really well. In other areas, not so much. Be sure to know the requirements of the resources that you find and how many hoops the person has to jump through in order to receive the closing voucher or get the weekly food ration. And also make sure that you need identification to access that. Ask your person who has, I think we've got some slides in a reverse order, but that's okay. Talk to the person that you're talking with who has been released about ways to access the internet. If they haven't been released yet, talk to them about ways that they can get connected to the internet. You can suggest the library or a local internet cafe with free Wi-Fi. Most of the folks can't get a library card because they won't have identification as soon as they get out. So Bella and I have talked at length about the communication issues, and there are some options that we're looking into to make sure that people are able to connect to us once they're released. Next slide. I feel like it's kind of a crapshoot which slide's going to come up next. Job acquisition is our second most requested service. Does anyone know what our first most requested service is? Housing. Everybody wants to know where it is they're going to live. They seem to think that we have a list of empty beds that are all over that we just have to call them up and say, hey, this person wants a bed, they're going to get out on such and such a date, and then it automatically becomes available. And that is absolutely not the case. Housing is one of the most critical issues for a person who is being released from prison. Job acquisition is our second most requested service. People want to know what kind of job they can get. While they're in prison, we are directing them to think about what it is that they would really love to do, the different kinds of careers that they want. They have a lot of time to sit and think in prison. We have a lot of people who are very successful once they're released, owning their own business, going to beauty school and becoming a hairdresser. We want to be supportive of whatever it is that they're going to do, even if it's not going to be sex work. Make sure that you know the locations of your local Social Security disability office. It's unfortunate that there are so many people who are in prison who definitely qualify for disability, but knowing where that they can qualify for these disability benefits can be very helpful. Make sure that you know the locations of any free or low-cost group or individual counseling, peer-supported substance abuse recovery spots like AA or NA, and make sure that you use the appropriate safety precautions, or I guess safety recommendations, if you don't know about that specific thing. There's been a lot of talk recently about AA and NA being places where people are being taken advantage of, being exploited, and even being abused violently. And this is very concerning. So be sure that you, if you're directing someone to go to AA or NA, make sure that you tell them to be careful and to, use their best judgment about who it is that they run into there. Next slide.
Yeah, and then one quick thing, and I'm going to share links to this. Many states have bans on any public benefits for people with felony drug convictions. This sucks ass. And I'm looking for better links that have a state-by-state breakdown. But for people who are advocating with these populations, don't help them fill out forms for services that they can't enroll in.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Same thing with jobs and education. I'm also going to share a link to who qualifies for FAFSA student loans, and it varies. It's complicated. No one in prison can receive federal financial aid while they're in prison, but people who are on parole, people with drug convictions, it depends on their conviction and how much time has passed. But anyways, I'm going to go to the next slide.
When it comes to someone who is actively seeking out education, I have not heard of anyone being turned down for financial aid that was in jail or prison because of a sex work related offense. Sometimes drug convictions can cause them to pause, but very often they might just have to go a few extra steps and answer a few extra questions. And it's unfortunate that they make it so complicated. It's very, very unfortunate they make it so complicated to access these resources, because if someone is going to apply to go to junior college, they should just be able to get in there. They shouldn't have to really explain their entire life. Once they're released, it's a lot of fun to meet them in person when you've been communicating with them just through the mail. It's very exciting to meet someone who's recently been released from prison. You can assess them with setting up an email account and social media connections. I have done this with folks who have been recently released, and it's very exciting to connect them to the community, to have people call them, to check in with them, to say hi, to give them ideas about things they can do to make their time matter. And I give them a gift basket of hygiene supplies and writing materials, stamped envelopes, things so that they can write their friends back in prison until they're able to establish some better relationships on the outside. I try to connect them with outside services. When I'm working with someone who's in Florida, I try to connect them to sex worker friendly organizations. I'm very fortunate to have Joe McCracken in this particular area, and many of the folks that we've had released from Lowell have come to the St. Petersburg area, and they've been able to go to the Red Tent Project. They're going to be going to our December 17th event, and it's very exciting to have them join our community in this manner. Connecting them with outside services that are sex worker friendly are very important. Don't think for a minute that the most important thing that you can't do to support someone who's been released from prison is to call them, because that is really a very exciting thing for them. They really love hearing from you, and they will call you as well. I always ask them, is there anything you need? And I don't ask them, is there anything you need? Because I'm getting ready to send them a check. I ask them because I want to get them to think outside the box and help them access the service that they're looking for. One of the young women that we had released from Lowell, she moved up to Brunswick, Georgia. And I sent her the basket of supplies, and I've been calling into her about once every 10 days or so, just to check and see how she's doing. She's living on a boat in the Brunswick, Georgia area. And she was really ready for me this last time when I called, and I said, so is there anything that I can do for you? Is there anything that you need? And she said, well, I could really use some tampons. And I was able to go online. I was able to look for a list of places that provide paper products, and I texted her the name, the address, the phone number, and all of the information that I was able to get off the internet, so that she is able to go and make her own arrangements for getting the things that she needs, because I doubt if tampons is the only thing that she needed. I also try to connect them with other network members. Bella has been very, very helpful in contacting people when they've been released. And because she's written in the newsletter, they feel very connected to her. Bella is one of our most popular columnists, and we get a lot of mail for her and about her. Bella, do you have any thoughts on this? I know that you've talked to a couple of folks that have been released.
Yeah, I'll weigh in real quick. And I wanted to say the reason I can really get behind SWOP Behind Bars is not only have I been in prison, I realize that this is a service that doesn't exist anywhere else. And I get that housing is a huge problem. I know in Rhode Island, our rents have doubled within the last 5 or 6 years, and usually a minimum wage job doesn't even cover the cost of housing. So I see SWOP Behind Bars as something that can grow into maybe opening halfway houses for, sex workers getting out of jail, but that will be run by sex workers, not rescue stuff.
We're not allowed.
We're not allowed to what?
Sex workers can't get funding to open up shelters.
Sure,
Well,
they can. There's ways to go around.
We can do that. We actually can, and we actually want to, and we're going to, because at the end of the day, there aren't services. We've been asking for people to let us join and provide peer support for them. They're not doing it, so we're going to do it ourselves, and we'll get it done. Let's face it, we're get it done individuals.
Well, in Pennsylvania, Act 105, which has set up all the parameters for funding and inclusion, does not have any LGBT or sex trade survivor or sex work mentioned. And it is something that only one representative was willing to read all the documents to establish that that's correct, and is trying to figure out in 2017 how to start addressing it. So maybe where you are, you can, but in Pennsylvania, unless an independent philanthropist comes forward and puts out the money, we can't.
Well,
there's nobody
find that philanthropist that is interested in doing that, because we have had trouble down here. We've talked about Salvation Army, and they've been just absolutely despicable in the way that they've treated folks.
I would really like to see if there's a way to get the ACLU involved in the way that the Salvation Army is receiving DOJ funding and then being brought in with law enforcement to immediately bring women into rescue without that being part of a formal processing.
From your lips to God's ears.
Right.
I can say this too. A lot of the funding is about how you frame things in your funding. If we frame it that we're sex workers, no, we're not going to get any money. But if we frame it like the rescue industry, we can get funded and open facilities and run them with sex workers.
I don't know about you, but I don't want to be independently responsible as lying and then having to do all that documentation. I want to be able to maintain the truth of who I am and what my history is. And I also want some personal protection between whatever assets I have and having to have all the finances go public. So there are
absolutely, and I think. Yeah, and then this is also an issue at the federal level regarding not having a funding specifically for jail LGBT youth. This is an act that's failed a number of times, despite lots of support. So I know that, Alex, you want to finish the PowerPoint. So I think I really want to continue this conversation about the challenges to creating concrete resources, the challenges to working towards decrim, but let's let Alex get through her PowerPoint. Is that cool?
Sure.
Yay, awesome.
All right, so phone calls matter. Please make phone calls to the folks that you have, that you are in contact with in jail, and especially as we build a relationship with, we've got about 400 names of people who have been in the sex trade industry who want to join our community. We need assistance with helping to make sure that they have the things that they need. We have built this as far as we can with me, Andrea, and Bill. So we need additional help in writing letters, finding resources that are available, and building the things that we need to have in order to have a healthy, successful community. Next slide. Can we get the next slide? Do I have the next slide? Catherine?
So if you click on my face as if I'm talking, then you can see the next slide for the PowerPoint.
Thank you. All right, there we go. What we are doing currently is, okay, the next one. Whoa. Okay. SWOP Behind Bars already provides inside a monthly newsletter. We have a lead article that is usually a reprint of something that has been well supported by the sex work community. We have pen pals that are able to write to anywhere between 1 and 5 folks. We create books lists on Amazon wish lists, and they are mailed to individual participants. We have re-entry materials, a workbook and journal that we're working on building. We provide substance abuse materials, post-traumatic stress disorder, trauma-informed materials, and GED workbooks. We have an alliance with Chicago Books to Women in Prison, which means that we can have used books sent to them. They will also distribute composition books that folks can use as journals as well. After release, we send the folks on our welcome home list, on our list, a welcome home pre-pack of hygiene items and $75 in gift cards to folks who've communicated their needs before release. This is not something that we publish in the newsletter. We don't send them a picture of it or anything like that, but someone who's been actively engaged with the pen pal, this is something that we offer to them. I have a letter that I have started sending to someone who is within 45 days of release, letting them know that we have this available to them, that we want them to join our community. And all they've got to do is call our SWOP community support line once they're released, and we will send this out to them. We are sending, right now, we're sending $75 in Walmart gift cards to folks who've been incarcerated. I have a young lady that's in San Francisco, and apparently they don't have Walmarts in San Francisco, which makes me really want to move there, to be honest with you. We're going to be finding an alternative to be able to send to her. Bella and I have been talking about finding a way to provide cell phones and 90 days worth of service to folks who've been in contact with us and with pen pals. They're not going to get iPhones with unlimited Wi-Fi and all of that sort of thing, but we are trying to find a way to provide cell phones and some service so that people can communicate with us. Our biggest asset is community and communication. So we have to make sure that we are providing those, the capacity for them to be able to contact us. We would like to forward potential community members to local support networks as we develop them. SWOP has chapters throughout the United States, and many of them have stepped up There have been many people that aren't involved with SWOP who have stepped up and are assisting us with helping create local welcoming communities for these folks once they're released. Phone support, again, and help them create an email account, activate their Facebook account and their social media accounts on Twitter, show them how to use it. Use messenger apps when available so that they're not using the data time that they have available, especially if they're using a public service phone. Again, phone calls matter. Next slide. A community support network should be able to help provide access and guidance toward the appropriate services for mental and medical health and public services. We all know this. This is not rocket science. We want to help you learn and for you to teach us how to practice better harm reduction strategies so that we can help to keep these people from going back to prison, from getting, from experiencing violence in the sex trade or out of the sex trade, or because they've been incarcerated. We want to help you to encourage them to participate in the creation of their own discovery of services, job strategies, or educational opportunities. We want them to get out of prison and discover a life that they can thrive in, not just having to survive and not just having to get by. And the number one thing that I can tell you is that I listen when folks tell me about the challenges that they're facing, and then I let them talk their way into a solution. This is new to me. Usually I'm used to telling everybody what to do, and that's a really bad idea, a really bad place to be in. It really goes a lot better when people are involved in creating their own solutions. So that's really made it that I deal with folks who have been released from prison. And I am a formerly incarcerated sex worker as well. Can we go to the next slide? They keep leaving. What's the next slide?
The next, if you click on me, it should pop up.
All right, here's how you can help SBB and how we can help you. Sign up to contact the incarcerated folks in your state and be their primary point of contact as they transition to release. We have more than 400 people that go across the country. You can keep a contact, if you can take on the people that are in your state or people that are near your state or a portion of the people that are in your state, that can really help create more of a personalized environment where these people can contact a specific person about their release that's coming up. You can sign up to help us provide accurate data about the needs you hear about from the folks that you're in contact with. So if you sign up to handle 10 people that are in your state and they are all saying that they need assistance with food, we need to come up with a solution in your local area to make sure that these people have food to eat, and we need to find the most accurate data about that. So let us know what that is. We'll build this program together. The more of us that bond together to build this, we can do this together, and we can do it better and stronger if we all do it together. Reach out to us when they are 90, 60, and 30 days out of release. Find out what their questions and generating communications. One of the things that I talked about early in this is it's very difficult for them to communicate their needs because people don't listen to them when they talk. So we've got to make sure that we listen to them, and when they tell us what they need, that we say, okay, I hear you, this is what you need. Because sometimes those conversations can go on for a long time. Help us build a network of service and support within your local community by updating contact information about what services are available, where and what has to be done to access those services. And for example, hoops, what kind of fiery hoops do they have to jump through in order to access those services? There's going to be a link on the website about resources, and it's going to be to start creating a database of resources that are going to be available throughout the United States. I have created the form. It just needs a little bit of tweaking, and we're going to be adding to that as we go on. Since the creation of SWOP Behind Bars, I've been creating a database of allies, of people that are interested in what we're going. I've been creating lists of our enemies. I think it's always good to know who they are. I want to make sure that we've got a large database. I have all of the names, phone numbers, and email addresses for congressmen and senators around the country who have voted on sex work specific bills and things that are important. Bella is a friggin' genius when it comes to knowing what bill it, I don't know, she's got to have software somewhere that I don't know about, because she knows when a bill comes up and she knows what it's about, and she know and she's able to read between the lines and see what about it that needs work. So it's very exciting, some of the things that we're building. I love building stuff. I love building stuff with you guys. This really works for me, and I really feel like we're making a difference in our community because we're addressing the needs of the people who really need us the most. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. Andrea?
Yeah, thank you.
Catherine?
Do we have any more questions, comments?
I've got one more comment real quick. This is Bella. If people call 211 from their phone, I believe in any city, you can get a list of all the shelters and food banks. So I created a list in Rhode Island, so if I get a crisis call, I'll at least have numbers to give out, or I can help people call them. So calling 211 might be the best way for everyone to develop a list in their own city.
You can start out with that, but make sure that you call those resources as well, or put on your hat and shoes and go visit someone, get a name and phone number. I've been able to develop some relationships that I'm going to be calling on very quickly here, by meeting someone and talking with them face to face and explaining to them, this is what I need and this is what this person needs. And people will be more than happy to help us if we have specific information. The 211 is an awesome resource, but I think that we can even do better with 211 if we use 211 to develop the resources and those people that call those crisis numbers.
Yeah.
Question?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
If I wanted to pitch SWOP Behind Bars to a nonprofit here in Philly, because I went around to all of them, and I'll be doing a write-up in my 2016 year of review.
Excellent, excellent.
I did find one that would be an excellent resource, because they're doing a lot of work as far as ban the box and expungement and housing. Do you have like a kit to present to organizations that might want to support sex workers coming out of prison?
We'll create one.
Great.
I'll give you a little info of what I did personally. Is I volunteered for a local domestic violence shelter. I had to take 10 hours of training. I went down the second Saturday of every month for over a year and volunteered my time. I offered them training on sex work topics, and they ignored me. They let me volunteer, and after a year, they announced they were opening a human trafficking shelter. We even had Alina from Brown meet with them too, and they're not interested in allowing us to do support groups or training, but they'll let us volunteer for them.
That should be reported to your attorney general. You know that, because that is just bullshit. Mm. That is a huge problem. They keep taking all of our information from us and then using it at our exclusion, and it's just bullshit.
And that's one of the reasons why we no longer want to provide the programming for them. We want to create our own. Right. We want to have our own community doing our own thing and engaging our own community members and building them up. And, I frankly, I have no more time. I have no use for the anti-trafficking community. I'm done with them. I'm done fighting with them. I'm done being angry at them. I'm just done with them. And quite honestly, they're not my people. Sex workers are my people, and those are the ones that I'm going to try and make sure make a difference for. I mean, there's sometimes when I think, oh, it'd be really fun to light these people up. But, to be honest with you, I really want to spend more time making sure that the services that I create are created in tandem with other people that know what they're talking about and know what they're doing and follow through with stuff. And that's what's important to me. I'm tired of being pissed off because other people aren't providing the things that I need. So we're going to make sure that the people that come behind us are handled differently.
And then I have another quick idea about how to get started with organizing SWOP Behind Bars in Philly. You might want to just start with a monthly or a bi-monthly letter writing party. Individuals would try to get matched with 1 to 3 different people. And so it would be like a kind of thing where, so that, to encourage people to continue writing and to get emotional support from other people on the outside. You could just have chips and letter writing to your pen pal, as well as other folks over the days.
Yeah, that's why I have Eris Val here is sitting in on the call.
Yeah.
He is aligned more with the 20-something people in the city than I am. Bit of a generational gap there, but also we both represent SM, and then I represent on top of that escorting and sheet dancing. So he's coming on board to hopefully help bridge some of that divide and do exactly what you were saying. Yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome. And now I'd like to ask some of the pre-submitted questions to all of you guys. Is that cool? Okay, fabulous. Let me pull it up. So what are some real ways to fight for decriminalization? How can we organize people towards decriminalization, and how can we get these people that we're reaching out to involved in our organizing work?
I really think that the argument for decriminalization becomes more obvious when you have conversations, real face-to-face conversations, and explain to people why the criminalization program is not the way to go. We can have Twitter fights, we can have articles written up in the Huffington Post, but at the end of the day, real communication is sitting down face-to-face across from people and explaining to them, here's the reason why your anti-trafficking program has closed 3 safe houses. I can help stop the closure of your safe houses. I can help stop them from running away because this is what you're doing wrong. The decriminalization is people. It's not to hurt you. It's not to hurt your Bible beliefs. It's not to hurt any of that kind of thing. We need to have real conversations with people about decriminalization. People don't understand it. People are afraid of what they don't understand. And that's when they lash out and they become unreasonable, shall we say.
Earlier when I was doing some printing, I printed out the SWOP-USA fact sheet on sex work and sexual assault. Looks like that. And while I was at the Parcel Center, and I had read out loud the Philadelphia comment on here, where judges and juries hold bias against sex workers. In Philadelphia, Judge Teresa Cardeni called gang rape of a sex worker at gunpoint, quote, theft of services, and refused to allow prosecution to press aggravated sexual assault charges. A man who was standing right next to me started laughing and said, yeah, but if it was theft of services, that would mean that it was legal. He got it instantly, and he wasn't even in our argument. If they're going to start, using our language, then they need to start coming on board. The main problem we have here is extreme violence, barbaric violence. And even if people are opposed to the lifestyle, anyone that supports the level of violence and murder that is happening here in Philadelphia consistently year after year has absolutely no moral and no ethic. We are trying to figure out how to de-escalate violence in realistic ways and decrim, at least in the city. If not, I understand not the city, but at least in the city would be a huge step. If we can start to get women allowed to, I'm going to present that petition in the Merseyside model frame to try to get it so that sex workers can begin reporting crimes here in the city, because the violence is out of control. And that is where we're coming in. It doesn't matter if you like the idea of someone being a trans prostitute. we still don't want them to be chopped up into pieces and distributed.
No.
Right. So that's where we're coming in, and I'm surprised at just how much support we are getting this year, because people are tired of the violence.
Yeah.
Yes, and the violence is something that that none of us should tolerate at all. I mean, there's just not anybody that supports violence. I mean, there just aren't any people that support violence. It's kind of like there's no pro-abortion people. There's pro-choice people. People want to be able to make that choice for themselves. We don't want people. We need people to understand how damaging it is for sex work to be criminalized in areas. You're absolutely right, especially urban areas. The stories that we read about in letters from the ladies in SWOP Behind Bars is truly terrifying. You just wouldn't, I mean, they've just experienced things that I can't even imagine. They've been incarcerated, the violence against them from the police through the incarceration process. I can speak from personal experience that the criminal justice system is what will run your life, not sex work.
Absolutely. And after one full year of having to interact with our justice-based authority figures, it left me physically ill. They're awful.
Yes.
The women especially are awful.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The women are actually the worst, which is, you know, I feel like they need to get that. We need to get that Margaret Mead T-shirt, like, you know, put it on cups, T-shirts, whatever, you know, about being mean to other women, because it's really horrifying how awful they can be.
And then
I've experienced violence from
the specific question. I'm going to give a brief overview of different approaches that people have taken towards decrim in the United States. And this is a topic that could be a whole webinar, but the Erotic Service Providers Union, or
it's the Erotic Service Providers Legal Educational Research Project.
Is filing a lawsuit for decriminalization that started in the state of California and is now going to the federal circuit. So that's one, which is really exciting. Yeah, so that's one avenue through the courts, and that initiative recently got an amicus brief signed by the ACLU, as well as a number of really prominent GLBT organizations, which is super powerful. They need funding to pay for this lawyer.
The ACLU lives.
So go find them and throw some of your change at them. So that's one option. New Hampshire had tried to introduce it through the legislature, right? And that failed fairly quickly. But that's another option, maybe at a city level, if you have an exceptionally liberal city, getting sex work decriminalized at a city level through the city council could be another option. Another option is to defund vice units. That has been a ballot initiative in Berkeley, as well as San Francisco, a number of times, and it failed by a margin. However, some of these, if you can highlight some sort of a police scandal within the vice department, a number of vice squads have gotten shut down, or prostitution arrests have been temporarily suspended. So look out for opportunities to get funding diverted from arresting people for commercial sex. Another option is maybe just decriminalizing buying or selling sex, like start small, because I feel like a lot of the initiatives have been fairly broad, and that hasn't, right, and so that gets stopped by a 1% margin, for example, in San Francisco, because it's too broad, and because it's too much of a contentious issue to support, to decriminalize, third parties or whatever, right? Like, it's better than nothing, in my opinion. And then the last idea is to sort of attack loitering laws. So a lot of cities and states have loitering laws, which basically allow police officers to just randomly arrest people, especially women of color and trans women who they expect are engaging in prostitution because they are standing on the street corner and talking to people. So maybe attacking that law, that is currently going on in New York. In terms of like how to treat people who have been impacted by incarceration in in your organizing and work, that is super important. Facts and statistics and like listening to me talking isn't really going to convince any legislator. And also my experiences and my stories aren't moving, right? I mean, so you really do have to include people in your advocacy. And I think that involves a lot of movement building and capacity building work, and really investing in developing a really diverse leadership. And I think a lot of times, because we're also scrappy and over capacity, we sometimes tend to prioritize like.
You think we are scrappy? What? You think we're scrappy?
Yeah.
No. I mean, our movements, right? Yeah, but sometimes it's worth it to just slow shit down and like build new generations of leaders as well. Yeah.
I got two ideas I'd like to chime in with about decrim that I've worked on. Number one is getting local support with legislatures. A lot of that's done through universities, and getting community members involved. Second, we found out with Tara up in Alaska, if you already draft legislation and then you go see your representative and your congressman, they're a lot more willing to listen to you. But this is a conversation you can't explain in 15 minutes, and that's about the amount of time that the legislatures will give you. But Providence, through a group called PRISMS, it's an Asian youth group, came up with the Community Safety Act. It's going to be a city ordinance. It's the first kind in the whole United States, which will hold law enforcement and ICE responsible for profiling and putting people in gang databases and that kind of stuff. And they've really embraced me, and I'm starting to work with them now. But I wanted to mention why you might be able to get a certain city to agree not to arrest people under the Nordic model, which means it's still illegal. The cops just don't arrest you. You can't change prostitution laws in a city or county. It has to be done at a state level. Mm-hmm. But I agree, there's a lot of things that we can do that are totally decrim that would reduce violence, and it's a stepping stone to decrim.
Here in Orlando, they recently decriminalized having up to an ounce of marijuana with you in the city of Orlando. That doesn't go out to all of Orange County, nor does it go to Seminole County, and it made just nearly almost everyone just fall over in a faint. But they decriminalized that in the city, so they couldn't decriminalize sex work. Or
I never even heard. I've never even maybe so. I've never heard that they could decriminalize weed in just the city and not the state. That's the first state when we met with the ACLU a couple of months ago, he told us, he said, well, he was very concerned about some of the situations that was coming out of Lowell. Lowell is one of the largest women's prisons in the United States, and it's exceptionally violent, and it's known for being very abusive and exploitive. And he said that they're very concerned about some of the things that were going on there. And he said, well, what do you want? And we kind of were like, well, we want there not to be anybody in there, for prostitution crimes. He said, well, you need to put together what it is you want and then bring it to us before you can't just be mad about it, because we're kind of preaching to the choir. We have to go to the ACLU with a plan of action and with a plan in place. And that, I would suggest
that's what we have to
doing
do here
something
in Florida.
like Tara did, and I'll explain what Tara did.
Yes.
What she did with the Senate bill, she knew they weren't going to decrim, because Alaska, their trafficking law says all prostitution's trafficking. It's the worst state. So she came up with things like, well, let's say that the cops are allowed to have any sexual contact with anyone involved in prostitution, anyone a victim of a crime, We can all agree on that, right? And then it was, well, we no longer want to see women arrested for promoting and trafficking just because they work together with another consensual worker. So they agreed to that. So there was 2 or 3 things they agreed with that will now stop a lot of the women from being charged with felonies. If they do get caught, will be a simple misdemeanor. Mm-hmm. So I would think that we would need to get with Tara and let her help draft something for Orlando.
Yes.
To take it to the ACLU. And that's what I mean. If you have something drafted, You
Yes.
can always amend things later, you know.
Of course.
But having
course.
something that you can wave around and get signatures on is
Yes,
really good.
they have in front of people, just like they did with the decriminalization of marijuana. You have to go out, you have to get signatures, you have to get a lot of people to agree with you, and in order to do that, you have to get a lot of people to understand what decriminalization means.
Right.
And
Now, let me ask you this about the marijuana in Orlando. When we decriminalized weed in Rhode Island, it basically said if you get caught with under an ounce, they take it away and they give you a civil ticket. So it doesn't show up on your criminal record and there's nothing to arrest you for. Did they clarify what that would mean for Orlando? Would it be a civil fine?
Because they did it within the city of Orlando and not Orange County, it's mostly for. It's mostly because, you know, we've got so many other more serious problems. They don't want to arrest people for drugs or prostitution here because of Mickey Mouse.
So they'll probably give them a summons to appear or a civil fine.
I think it was up to the cop. I think it was really up to the cop.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's better than nothing.
Yes, it is. Yes, it
And
is.
then, yeah, and then one other sort of quick way to, or if you can't get decriminalization, a way of going towards it is addressing expungement, sealing, and vacatur laws. So a lot of expungement laws only apply to first arrests. So you will not be able to expunge, for example, prostitution or, you know, drug possession if this is your like second arrest. And this is pretty common across states. So basically increasing the number of low-level nonviolent crimes that can get expunged, increasing the number of charges you can have before, you know, where you can get it expunged, increasing sealing, which your record from most employers, but not really important ones in like female-dominated industries like healthcare or education, which is still, you know, so sealing is not, you know, perfect. And then vacatur laws, which wipe former charges if you are labeled as a victim of trafficking. I've got a few more questions that I want to ask y'all.
I got a comment. I got a comment about the expungement because I wanted to tell you my personal experience and how this planned out for me. I get if you have one soliciting charge, nothing else on your record, and it's not online, having that hidden is great. My first prostitution charge in Florida, they told me if I pled guilty, did 6 months probation, they would withhold adjudication. And I can go to Pinellas County Jail and pull up my name and it says prostitution adjudication withheld. So vacating records after your name's been out to the media, after your mugshot's been online, does absolutely no help. You can go to Been Verified and find these arrests still tagged in even after the cases are vacated.
Yes.
So it
Jane from SWOP Minneapolis is asking how people responded to the label sex worker. We mentioned that self-identification is not common. People wanted to know what sex work was. That was their main question. What was a sex worker? What specifically does the sex worker outreach project mean? What is the sex worker activist? What is the sex worker rights movement? What does decriminalization mean? I mean, there's a lot of questions, which is one of the reasons we're trying to send in as many books as possible, because, you know, obviously it's a very nuanced issue. We also have a group of women who identify as sex trafficking victims, even though they were charged with sex trafficking charges. So you know, it's not. The sex trafficking victims actually prefer the term sex worker to the term victim. No surprise there.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of these terms are sort of taught by the services that are in prison. So people don't, while they're engaging in street-based sex work, or while they're maybe with a sort of abusive boyfriend who's taking a decent amount of money, they're not identifying as like a survivor of sex trafficking. They're not identifying as a victim, but a lot of the programs within prisons, as well as diversion programs, have this framework. So this is really a language that is taught. And I think that one of the awesome things about SWOP Behind Bars is really giving people a different like framework through which to view themselves and their own experiences. And a lot of people react really, really positively towards that.
We also don't require people to self-identify, either very often do, and they very often do to their pen pal. That's generally a conversation that takes place kind of in a different format. But that's, I love what is going on with SWOP and what it has the potential to do. Also, I don't know if we have, if I was hoping that we would have some of our public defenders that I've been talking with recently on. The Public Defender's Office has been probably one of the biggest supporters of decriminalization that you could possibly imagine. They would do just about anything in order to get these silly prostitution charges off of their platter. They have a lot more serious stuff in the works. So I don't know if any of those people are on here tonight. If you are, thank you so much for coming. And we look forward to working with you in the future on helping you clean up your plate with some of these things.
I just have a few more quick questions. So how do you clean or expunge a record of someone who has been charged with prostitution? And this question is someone from Wisconsin. You know, I don't know your state laws well enough to know whether the person that you're up about would be eligible for, or what kinds of criminal record remedies are eligible. I'm going to look that up and I'll send you a message. But basically, it's going to vary significantly from state to state, and that information should be in a part of an expungement section of the state legal code that goes over what charges are or are not eligible. And then your probably Madison or Milwaukee's Legal Services Center will have a help guide or a how-to on that, which should be useful to you as well as people you work with. And then one other question before we wrap up is, so does anyone know the number of sex workers in the US who are serving time for sex work? What percentage of these people were versus a different crime? Any data that you guys at SWOP Behind Bars have?
We are working very hard to update our data to find out a little bit more about that. We want to do research. That's one of the reasons why we kind of set it up with the framework that it's got, is we intend it to be available for research. I'm not a researcher. I'm a sex worker and a hairdresser. So I don't know anything about data collection. We have 400 people exactly on our mailing list right now. We've had 7 released, 3 of whom were white, 4 of whom were black, and I think 2 were Asian and 1 was Hispanic. I know approximately we're all anywhere between 25 and I think our oldest one was 41. So far that we've had released. The people that are on our list are black, white, male, female, trans. There's just a lot of different experience there for the research about that. We have no idea. There have been rumors that have been circulated, come out of the prison, that there's a very, very large percentage of women who have been incarcerated who've been involved in the sex industry. But the number is too high for me to even say out loud, because I don't want to turn it into a fact that all of a sudden, next thing I know, it becomes one of those fake news things.
Actually, this is interesting. Margot St. James found out in the 70s, she was also a private investigator, that 75% of all the women in the United States, the first time they went to jail, it was for prostitution.
I wouldn't be a bit surprised if that was still close to being true.
Right. Now, we do know how many people are being arrested, and we have them separated by male and female, so you can assume most of the males were the client, but it still doesn't tell you how many people are in jail, which is a huge project. I don't even know how to begin to do that.
And then there is federal data on the number of prostitution-related arrests that are made in a given year. But federal data is really scrappy because each different state keeps track of their information in a different way. And not all states are passing along their data to the feds.
Right, they're not required to.
Yeah, so it's really imperfect data. I think the number that I last saw was something like 49,000 individuals across the United States are arrested for prostitution-related charges, of which we can assume that the
Actually,
vast
Norma has the charts on her site, Police Prostitution
Really?
and Politics, and she takes the numbers from the FBI and DOC. But like you said, we only know what they report.
Right.
But she's got the best numbers, and she's got the charts and everything.
I really like the way that she's delineated the data too. It makes for a really interesting read. Usually some of those data reports are enough to, they're really honors, but her stuff is pretty interesting.
Yeah, so I think that those are all of the questions that we've got.
Well, once again, thank you so much for being at the webinar tonight. Thank you so much for all of the support that you've given to SWOP Behind Bars up to now. And we look forward to your continued support in the future. And let's build this thing together. Let's make a difference. And let's create real change inside of our community so that the next generation of sex workers has it a lot better than what we did.
Awesome. You sound like a pro, Alex. Thank you, ladies. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. All right, bye.